Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Innovate Answers. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about my thoughts on team extension options or outsourced dev teams and talk to you a little bit about what we see with our clients. What are some of the things to keep in mind if you're in the process of putting together an outsourced team or are considering that as an option for some of your product development efforts? So there's a variety of reasons why a product leader or an engineering leader would look at staff augmentation as an option for their particular efforts they're taking on. Usually you can summarize it by it's a lack of in-house resources. And that can come in the form of just bandwidth, like capacity to be able to take on the initiative, or also particular talent. Sometimes you need certain types of talent for new initiatives that you don't really have on your full-time team. Other times, maybe you do have that, but they just don't have the bandwidth available to focus on that project. And I think one way to think about it is if you have a full-time team, you're assuming that they stay busy. There's enough work to keep them busy. And oftentimes when you're taking on a big new initiative, like building a new product or a big expansion to a product, or perhaps, a refactor of the product itself, then typically that's going to be work that is above and beyond the normal workload that you have for your in-house team. And so in those types of situations, looking for staff augmentation or dedicated external teams or outsourced teams can be a good option to help you make sure that you can take on those initiatives while still not dropping the ball on things that you are already having to do as just a normal course of your business. And oftentimes these initiatives are rather short-term in nature. So maybe they're 6 months, maybe they're 12 months, maybe they're even 18 months. Some can be a little bit longer, but the point being that they're not permanent, or they're not expected to be long-term. And so the last thing that you really want to do is hire full-time employees for something that you know that you probably won't be able to keep them busy beyond, maybe a short amount of time, 6 months, 12 months, that kind of thing. So in those situations, having an outsourced team or a staff aug team can help you shore that up for that period of time, and then you can remove them from the team once that effort's completed. But think about a specific example from one of our clients' situations where staff aug was a really good fit. We had a software company in the healthcare space. They got a big investment from a PE firm, and part of their strategy for investing in the company is that they were going to refactor a very large portion of their product in order to expand into new markets. And the big problem they were running into is that architecturally they were kind of landlocked, and they were really worried about scalability. And so refactoring was their way of addressing that potential problem of adding new customers rapidly. And so what started off as sort of some focused strategy work around just thinking through what that refactor would need to include and some of the more user experience elements of that effort turned into a need for a dedicated team or a staff aug team that worked directly under their supervision as just an expansion of their in-house team. So in their case, they had the core leadership on their internal team. They had the expertise on what they needed to do. What they didn't have was enough capacity to really do it in a feasible amount of time. So in their case, they needed to move rapidly. So they worked with us. We set up a staff aug team, an outsourced team for them that had mainly developers and QA engineers that then worked on particular pieces of the effort under the direct supervision of the client's in-house leadership team. I probably need to talk about the speed. Like by the time you start trying to recruit your own resource and actually get them onboarded and are successful in getting the right resource, your competitor has already been shipping stuff. It's very easy to underestimate the overall time and money commitment there and the risk of just getting it wrong, even if you do a really good job. Taking for granted how hard it is to identify, get the right person, and be successful on one try, right? That's hard, and I think people underestimate that, okay, we need a resource, so we're just going to open a job rec and we're going to start doing it. I think they underestimate how much time it's going to take, not just like their time and having to do it, right? Somebody has to review these candidates. Somebody has to filter it, pre-screen, assess, interview. And then even once you find somebody, you have to, hire them, onboard them, and then it has to be successful. And if any of that goes wrong, you go back to square one, you start again. I think one of the things our clients like is the convenience of, if there is an issue, they make a phone call and then Jeff or somebody from N08's team handles it. And oftentimes it's just something about working with a resource to train them on something, set different expectations. Most of the time that will fix it, right? However, if it's the case that it's just not a fit, it's literally a phone call or an email, and someone else now owns the responsibility of fixing that. It's sort of a cliche to say that technology changes so fast, but honestly, it's changing so fast today. And the different frameworks, the skills, the tools that people use, even a lot of the AI tools and things that are helping developers and designers and testers become more effective and quick at their job. Those things are evolving super quick. And one of the things that I think is kind of an advantage about using a consulting group or some sort of an outsourced team is that as those things evolve, you can focus your search on these new tools or these new frameworks, these specific needs of the hour, and they evolve, right? So there's a lot of flexibility built into that. One of the other things that's kind of nice about using an outsourced partner, especially one that is really focused on the strategy and the consulting piece of it, is you don't have to be the expert in the ever-evolving landscape of technologies. They need to be doing that. And so they should be able to answer those questions about what things should I really pay attention to right now? What things are you seeing across other clients that are really adding value that I should look further at and take seriously? And then what's the stuff I could kind of ignore for all intents and purposes right now? If you've ever seen the Brad Pitt movie Moneyball, I think it makes for a really great analogy when building an outsourced software product team. In the movie, if you remember, they talk about that you can't stack a team full of superstars. You can't stack a team full of players that are making $100 million a year.
We're still trying to replace Giambi. I told you we can't do it, and we can't do it. Now, what we might be able to do is recreate him. Recreate him in the aggregate.
The what?
Giambi's on-base percentage was 477. Damon's on-base, 324. And Almeida's was 291. Add that up and you get...
1092.
Divided by 3.
364.
That's what we're looking for. Three ball players whose average OBP is...
364.
What you can do is be smart about how you configure a team full of players at a much lower budget and still match the results. And I think if you think about that analogy and apply it towards building an outsourced team, there's a lot that you can learn from that. An example would be if you're, like most of our clients are in the US, if you just got what you would prefer, you would probably say, I want a team full of resources here in the US, right? And there's no time difference and it's easier to communicate, throughout the day and that type of thing. But that's not real practical when it comes to budget most of the time for most of our clients. So what is a way that you can look at what are the different roles that I really need to cover and what's the right mix that I can use that would get me the best results while really maximizing what I can get for my budget? And so if we talk about maybe a couple of examples about what does that look like, one could be that certain real specific or niche or very experienced and sometimes expensive roles like, solutions architects, UX architects, those kinds of roles that are really important. Maybe you look at a fractional option for that contribution on the team, right? Maybe you look at mixing geographies. You could perhaps say, look, we're gonna do 2 resources from the US, and then we're also going to mix that with several resources from India, for instance. And then we're going to have a testing lead in the US and several people on the testing team from India. So you can mix it some so that in aggregate, you really get the results that you're looking for, but you're doing it at a much more cost-conscious budget. Oftentimes, the team extension resource that you think you need is not the actual resource that you do need. So a request that I frequently hear is a client will come to us and ask for a full stack developer. And you may have heard the term full stack developer a lot over the last several years. And in a lot of cases, it really makes a lot of sense. A lot of it comes down to how do you define full stack developer? Pretty frequently when I hear that request and we start digging into the details of what exactly do they need to do, they're not really looking for a full stack developer. They're looking for Superman. And they're looking for someone that can, do front end development, can do back end development, know some architecture. They can manage AWS. They can kind of do some DevOps stuff. So the more you start to pile on things to this definition of what is a full stack developer, the more likely it is that you're not really going to find the right fit. Or what you'll frequently do is you'll find someone who can check all the boxes on these skills list, but they're not real strong in any particular area. So it begins to get, again, it gets really important to boil it down to what are actually the important things that this person has to be really good at. And then what are the sort of nice to have skills that we would like them to have. And so you think of in two buckets, it's must-haves and nice-to-haves, and you really kind of have to prioritize those. And so depending on the size of the team, and if you're looking to spin up an outsourced team or a team extension, you're thinking about what's the total makeup of the team. And so most of the time it wouldn't make sense to say, hey, I want a 7-person team and I want all of them to be full stack developers. It might, but I would say most of the time that would not make sense. Rather, you would say, okay, how are we going to divide up the responsibilities? What's the workload look like across the different areas of development? And then do we need maybe 1 or 2 people who can really do full stack that can kind of hop over and help on front end? They can work on back end, that kind of thing. So you have some flexibility there, but you do want people in the different roles that are really, really strong at their element of it. So in my example of like a 7-person team, you might have a full stack developer or 2 in there, but you probably would want to make sure that you have some bona fide, like 1 or 2 back end developers, a couple of bona fide front end developers, that's really their strength. And that's what they spend most of their time doing. So again, it goes back to the total mix of what does your total team look like? What kind of skills and capabilities do I have already? And what holes do I have? And then what are the real must-haves that this developer has to have? Sometimes a full stack developer is the right answer. Sometimes it's not. So if I think about what makes N08's team extension offer a little bit unique than what you might run across otherwise, there's kind of 3 things that come to mind. One of them is that it's not just staffing in the sense of you tell us this is the job description and we provide you that resource. One of the most valuable elements of what we offer as part of our team extension model is the actual strategy consulting piece. In our case, we call it the innovation lab. We really bring to the table a lot of expertise and strategy around knowing exactly what's the makeup of the team that you need and how to best sort of configure that so that you got the right balance between effectiveness and efficiency. And, part of that is our ability to offer some of the resources in sort of fractional allocations, which is really valuable because a lot of the times you have needs for resources within the team, but you don't really have the workload that would support, a full 40 hours a week, for example. And so some of the team members can be fractionally allocated so that we can dial it in and really hit the sort of best mix of what's most effective in your situation, along with what's most cost efficient as well. So that's something that we help you kind of understand once we really see what you're trying to do, and we can make suggestions on what type of configuration we would recommend for the extended team. So that would be one element. The next one is, is really our process for how we vet and recruit for talent. And I think a lot of people say we've got the best recruitment process, but we've really invested a lot at Innovate in getting really good at that. And one of the surprising elements about that is one of the most obvious as well, which is it really begins with having a lot of clarity around what do we actually need? What does the actual resources on the team, what do they need to be good at? What kind of experience do they need? That kind of thing. And that's something that people oftentimes take for granted. I often say that clarity is the antidote to risk. And usually when I'm talking about that, I'm referring to service design. Like clarity in designing your product is really an antidote to risk, but it also applies to building your outsourced team. You have to first be really clear about what exactly are we trying to do, what are the important roles that have to be covered, and what kind of budget am I working with, so that you can really configure that team to make sure that you reduce risk and you get the results that you're looking for. For example, they'll look for a resource that has all of these different skills, all these different experiences, and many times, in fact, most of the time, the first shot at trying to define what type of resources we need is kind of an unrealistic expectation in most cases. So I think one of the things that we are really good at is really boiling it down to what are really the must-haves that must be present for the resources in the different roles, and then helping the client get clear on that. And then that helps us be a lot better at really hitting the target right the first time. And so that recruitment process, has a lot of other steps in it where we're starting to use certain types of assessment tools and things like that really help us vet candidates throughout the process and end up with the best people that we're actually working with in in-person interviews, that kind of thing. So the overall process is really good, but it all begins with knowing what target you're trying to hit and making sure you're hitting the right target. And then the other one is that we really have a lot of options to offer in terms of geography. So, whether it's an onshore type of resource, it's a more of a nearshore type of option where maybe it's Latin America or South America, same time zone, but still pretty cost effective, or an offshore option, right? It's a different, the fit is determined by the client's specific needs. And so it's not a one size fits all kind of thing. I've seen people try to go straight to the offshore option, but they just don't have the process and the leadership internal to really manage that well. Others, they have a need to really be able to be aligned in the same time zone with the resources, and they like the cost profile of Latin America or South America, so that could be a better option. So I think, again, it's really understanding what are the objectives, what's the makeup of the internal team, and what are your capabilities for oversight and governance, and then budget, is the last piece of it that you have to work with. So you sort of look at all of those different factors and determine, is one of those the right fit, or sometimes is it a mix of those different options? So when we think about resources that might make sense on a fractional basis, typically I see that they're sort of the type of resources that have very specialized experience, and very often they're in what I would kind of call like a high leverage role where it's really important, but they may not have a big enough need to justify, a full allocation like 40 hours a week from that type of resource. A few different roles come to mind that would often fit into that category. One would be sort of a solutions architect type of role, or a technical lead. Now, I'm a big fan of having a technical leader fully dedicated to the effort, but assuming that you have sort of the overall technical leadership covered, then a solutions architect could be one of those roles where you need them at certain points a lot more, and then you need them sort of lightly involved in between. And so having the ability to have a really experienced, very talented solutions architect that can help you at sort of key decision points, maybe at the beginning of the engagement, laying out the architectural plan, or putting together a new plan for like a refactor, assessment work on architecture. That could be something that's a little bit temporary in nature. But then once they do that, they can be allocated a little bit more lightly in that role at that point, might be more of code reviews, inspection, like checking in on things to make sure that the direction the team is going is aligned with sort of the architecture or the technical plan that they put together at the beginning of the engagement. So solutions architect is one example that I think shows up a lot for fractional needs. Another one would be a really experienced UX person. So think like a UX strategist. These are people who are really more than like designers that are creating screens, although they can certainly do that in most cases. But when you're really looking for someone to scrutinize something more from a user experience standpoint, that work is typically front loaded, and then you want them involved throughout the process, but they just probably aren't needed 40 hours a week. So it's very typical for us with our clients where we would have a UX strategist involved pretty heavy at the beginning, setting the direction and doing the research that's needed and really laying out the vision for the user experience. But then we would drop their allocation down once we actually start building, because we still want them involved. There's a lot of context and there's a lot of background there around why they made certain decisions or the thought process behind why they designed something a certain way. And you want to keep them allocated and plugged in throughout the process. You don't want to completely remove them because then gaps can show up. But at the same time, you may not need that person fully allocated as a full-time resource. So solution architect, a UX strategist. The third one, I think that fits that bill for a lot of companies, really more like startups and sort of early growth stage software companies, would potentially be something like DevOps. A lot of times, again, that's work that might be focused at a certain point in the process, maybe up front, getting environments set up and getting code pipelines set up and some of those types of things. And then you may not need them 40 hours a week all the time, but then you may need them more at the time that you're getting ready to go live to production, for instance. And so that's kind of a theme you'll see across all three of these examples that I talked about, is that maybe their effort is focused in little bursts at certain key points, but then consistently across the whole life of the engagement, you may not need them that whole time. But at the same time, these are really important, high leverage types of resources. So it adds a lot of risk to your effort if you're not incorporating the right types of people in these roles along the way. And at the same time, you may not be able to justify them 40 hours a week throughout the life of the engagement. And in that case, fractional allocations or fractional resources in those roles can be really helpful. One of the common complaints I get when I'm talking to clients is that when they've tried to work with more of a traditional like IT staffing company, what they end up with is an army of recruiters doing keyword searches on LinkedIn and certain job boards, and then throwing resumes against the wall to see if something sticks. And to find really good resources and to really meet the need of the customer, you have to first have a very defined target and know exactly what you're looking for. And that goes way beyond just searching for matching keywords. In my experience, if you look at technical resources resumes, they're kind of stuffed with keywords. Anytime they've ever touched any particular technology, it's going to show up in the resume. So automatically you're getting a lot of people that are showing up in your pool of potential resources that really aren't a good fit for the target that the client's trying to hit. I think one of the biggest values that we bring to the table when we're talking with a client who is planning to bring on some sort of an outsourced team is really helping them clarify and create the right team for them. And that's something you don't really get from more traditional IT like staffing companies. We do this a lot. And so we have to do this internally how we determine how to staff our project teams. And so we've gotten really good at that. And that's sort of the expertise that we bring to the conversation. A client will come to us. They will oftentimes have a pretty clear idea what they think that they want, But what is great and where I feel like I add a lot of value in these conversations is we start with what they're trying to do, and then we come back with several different options, and we kind of give them choices so they can see what the trade-offs are with different potential outsourced team configurations. And, we can play with those a little bit throughout the conversation, but I think that strategy piece really gets overlooked a lot of times because they think of it sometimes as like a menu. I need 3 full stack developers. I need 2 front end developers. I need 2 QA people. And then they go out and they put that order into the market, so to say, and they just get back exactly what they ask for. But what we do is we really question, is this the right team? And we give suggestions on here's different configuration options. Here's the pluses and minuses of those. And then ultimately, I think we land on a team that's really a much better fit for what they're trying to accomplish. I often say that clarity is the antidote to risk. And usually when I'm talking about that, I'm referring to service design, like clarity in designing your product is really an antidote to risk, but it also applies to building your outsourced team. You have to first be really clear about what exactly are we trying to do, what are the important roles that have to be covered, and what kind of budget am I working with, so that you can really configure that team to make sure that you reduce risk and you get the results that you're looking for.